Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, How to Use DevSuite for Implementing Scalable Hybrid Agile Projects. My name is Renee Alanis. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at TechExcel. TechExcel is proud to host our 2013 webcast series. We hold informative webinars on various topics once a month throughout the year. Be sure to visit our website at techexcel.com for the current list of upcoming webinars. Today's webinar will run about 45 minutes and conclude with a question and answer session. So I encourage you to use the question function. It's located at the right-hand side of your screen. Just type in your question and we will answer them at the end of today's discussion. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Tiran Zhao. He's the CEO and founder of TechExcel, as well as the creator of the specification-driven development methodology. Welcome, Tiran.
Thank you, Renee. In today's webinar, we'll be talking about mainly how to use DevSuite 9.2.1 to implement hybrid agile. It's based on the methodology SpecDD I created. We have been conducting both web-based training as well as classroom-based training and conference trainings as a kind of master classroom training for conferences by myself and by the SpecDD certified trainers, other trainers. But today's topic will be mainly on how to use LLM tools like DevSuite to implement hybrid agile like SpecDD. So first, we want to talk about what is DevSuite. DevSuite is a suite of tools as an enterprise quality LLM solutions. It consists of DevSpec for requirement management, DevPlan for modern way of planning for agile project as well as non-agile project, DevTrack for defect tracking and implementation trackings. So it can be used for both defect tracking tools as well as for the purpose of implementing agile and non-agile processes. DevTest is for quality management. All these tools work together to enable a team to work developing process management, not just from point of view planning isolated, but everything all together integrated. Knowledge-wise provides essential knowledge and document management tools. And so knowledge document can be viewed everywhere from the DevSpec user interface, the DevPlan and DevTrack and DevTask, and they share the same look and feel of managing your document and knowledge. DevSuite also includes add-on tools like the PPM for portfolio project management. So it provides a high-level manager's view of looking at your project, monitoring the health of your company's projects, version link for integration with source code control tools, and DevTime for timesheet management. So why DevSuite 9.2.1 for hybrid agile? We believe the future of agile is hybrid agile. By the market research by the leading analyst firms, real-world agile teams tend to mix both agile process and best practice functions from other methods. DevSuite support agile, hybrid agile, and waterfall process. It's based on a designer's philosophy of the future of agile is going hybrid, where requirement and quality should be integrated with the product backlog and your agile process. While you're doing agile management, you should do planning, but in a more simplified, modern way. A multi-level planning is available inside DevSuite. DevSuite enable you to manage your process based on Scrum, XP, SpecDD, and other methods like waterfall processes. and it has a model of testing so that it can be fully integrated with your Agile development to help you to make your Agile development to be more scalable and balanced. So this is the process model of SpecDD. So a development is represented primarily as a working software your team needs to deliver, but it will be developed by converting requirements and product backlog into the working software functions. It does so by dividing development into multiple iterations. Often an iteration is called sprint. So for each sprint, you commit a set of requirements, a set of defects, and turn them into working software. As you perform the implementations, the requirement gets improved, gets implemented into the working software. The working software is often used for you to improve the requirement. As you gain better understanding of the requirement, you actually need to document such understanding and make the requirement to be more complete. In SpecDD, requirements are not consumed objects. Product backlog gets consumed. As they become working software, the backlog items get disappeared. But the requirement actually in SpecDD retain by themselves as objects. Not only that, they drive the total traceability so that requirement drives the development as well as the quality. Testing library or testing standard is created by creating test cases. Each test case is linked often with requirement. As you develop the working software, the sprint or the Agile testing model lets you further improve the testing cases. And therefore, your test library becomes more and more complete as your working software becomes improved. Such testing library can be used to create release test plan and test cycle so that you can have an independent but coordinated testing teams to continuously test and perform testing to test your working software, and defect found get submitted mainly into the product backlog. So this slide provides a different angle about viewing the SpecDD model. It's the object model, where requirements are represented via requirement space. It consists of epic document, and the spec. For those of you attended the SpecDD trainings, you remember, spec is the quantified requirements. In other words, you might have documents, might have epic representing the bigger ideas or detailed description of your requirements. But spec are more user-friendly and development-friendly. They often, a spec represent about 3 days of work to implement a feature. The spec might initially exist without detailed documents, or the spec might be already fully understood. Therefore, even test cases are created before such requirement get assigned to development. But often, a requirement does not need to be fully understood, does not need to be fully documented. However, a spec represents an abstract of what the product owner wants to develop as a requirement or as a specification of a feature. But the abstract description of a spec need to be further documented as the working software gets delivered. helping you to understand what the requirement detail ought to be. As the spec gets assigned to a development space, they become stories, and stories are assigned with development tasks, and the development tasks represent the driving power by your programmers or by your Agile team members to drive story and to implement them to become working software functions. In SpecDD, or using the SpecDD model, QA testing within a sprint is represented with a child task of a development task. As you enrich the testing library, it provides you the test cases needed for you to create testing plan and testing cycle to perform regression testing. As you submit defect, they get accumulated into the product backlog. So we have just covered the process model, the object model of SpecDD. This slide shows you the framework, which gives you the people, the job role, the development space, the requirement space, the quality space, as well as all these object and process, it all interconnected to show you how the SpecDD work. Obviously, we're going to not spend much time. Instead, we're going to just use DevSuite to show you how do you, using ALM tools to manage your Agile or waterfall process more like based on the framework of SpecDD, where requirements are assigned to a development space, and development goes by iterations with the daily stand-up meetings. As the working software gets delivered, your QA regression team perform testing. And inside a development sprint, Agile testing is also performed. We want to emphasize your team normally consists of product owners, project manager, or the SpecDD master. You often have a multiple Agile team. The development team, if you perform Agile, normally will be 5 to 9 people, 7 minus plus 2. You may have QA floaters join your Agile team to help you to perform testing within an Agile process. But often you will have an independent QA team working for one or multiple Agile teams to make sure the total product quality is assured via performing regression testing. I want to emphasize in SpecDD, requirement management can be represented via a concept called Word epic. A Word document is represented to enable team to modify your requirement just using Word. As you perform editing using the Word, you can see the Word document might contain the child specifications. And such specifications inside the Word can be isolated, become itemized, and become an item of a spec item inside DevSuite. As you modify, rechecking the Word document, such requirement spec gets populated, updated. So the content is very easy to read, and yet it gives you the total itemized spec to drive total traceability. QA test event is a concept used to enable your Agile sprint process to have testing, but the testing is performed as a subtask instead as a main task. As a subtask, that means for every development task within a sprint, now you can associate one or multiple child testing tasks, or in the dev track term, event, so that you can perform testing so that when the developer claims a development task is completed, such as the time remaining becomes 0, you can mandate some testing must be performed. So the quality is assured to better assure the quality of the development sprint, because every development task has a mechanism of testing its quality before you can claim the time remaining becomes 0 or task gets closed. Some testing must be performed, and such testing are actually connected with the test case. A typical task workflow inside DevSuite or DevCheck is represented with a simple workflow where a new task gets to be created in a state to be assigned or directly put into in progress. The developer drives the task, claiming the time remaining, becoming going down. As the task gets closed, often it goes through a QA floater verified state. Finally, a task gets closed. When the QA floater needs help from additional QA effort, then these two states might be needed for having QA submitters or other QA members to verify a defect or a task can be reproduced before the programmer can fix it, or some additional testing is needed by the QA team other than the QA floaters so that the testing can be better performed. But mainly a task goes over these a few states. Obviously, you might be performing using DevSuite to do non-agile project management, then your workflow can be more complicated. So now we're going to spend about 25 to 30 minutes to talk about the product. So I will log in as the same user to save time, but I will be talking as if as a different user using DevSuite. Sometime I'll be talking about more like a product designer or product owner to talk about how do you manage requirement. Then sometime we'll talk about how do you create test cases associated with requirement as a QA team member. Then we'll be talking about how do you assign stories to a development iterations as a product owner or as a project manager. Then inside a sprint using DevCheck, we'll be talking about how do you manage the task, how do you manage the workload for the team and for each Agile team member. And as a QA floaters, how do you perform testings for a development sprint. Then we'll be using DevCheck quickly to cover how do you create testing release plan and create test cycles, perform the testings, and how when a testing fails, how do you submit defect and where this defect should go. Then we'll be quickly to talk about the planning for the Agile project and the non-Agile project, the modern ways where planning is done in a light Agile way, not necessarily too heavy like Microsoft project plan ways. And finally, we will talk about the portfolio modules, show you how can you perform reporting at a high level as high-level managers or as a project managers at the detail level of planning. So now we're going to go to the product. So I will maximize the screen size. This is DevSuite. So let's go to the requirement view and the home dashboard page. So as you log in, you can configure DevSuite so that you might be forcing every team member to be always looking at the home dashboard first so that they are aware of some of the reports important to them or some of the announcements you want to see, or the workload at the project level or the work item at the team member level, so that as you want your team member to look at the important items, always take a glance of the project overview from the home page. Obviously, you can configure it so that upon login, you will be just looking at a view that you were looking at when you log out previous time. This is the requirement view. As a product owner, you have two options. You can manage the requirement in a requirement space, or you can actually just manage the requirement in a development space. A development space, to me, is the most important space your team should be looking at, especially if you are performing Agile practice. So this is a space representing the Content Sharing Manager version 1.0. A space represents a major version release, in this case, the version 1. We are managing this space using Agile practice. You can also create space to represent with Agile with multiple sub-release, or creating a space to manage a product version release with traditional method. So let's take a look at the Agile space. So we create a space, then we further create multiple sprints. This is current sprint, sprint 4. Inside sprint 4, you commit multiple requirements, multiple defects as the workload of your team. But before we assign the workload, let's take a look at requirement. So this shows you a linked requirement space. In other words, a project in DevSuite consists of requirement space, development space, and a quality space. So as a product owner, I might be just looking at all the requirements. I might decide to create a new epic or new Word document epic. And for each of the requirements, I can look at the detail by turning on the detail frame on. So as I click on each of the requirements, I see the detailed information of the requirement. On the top, you have 3 views. The relationship views, where the requirements are organized with epic, with spec. The requirement might have relationship. So in this case, 1270 is a child spec of 1269. Itself has another child spec. The child spec of 1271 has a child spec of 1272. So the relationship view gives you the ability of organizing requirements with unlimited levels of dependency. And there is a requirement folder called Requirement Using Word Add-in. It gives you the ability of creating a requirement just using a Word document. So if you open a Word document, we're looking at a Word document viewer created by DevSuite. It's called Idea Player. So as you notice, you might contain multiple requirements. And so the requirement lives inside a Word document. As you modify the Word document and recheck in, you will be getting the populated child spec. So these child specs, for the content, it lives in the Word. But as an item, if you click on any of the requirement spec, you can see the detailed properties. So it has all the links. In other words, as you can see, a spec lives in a Word but itself can drive the backlog creations, the development creation, as well as the testing case standard. So it gives you the total traceability while it gives you the flexibility of modifying your requirement using Word. So let's take a look of the requirement space of all the requirements. So you can look at the requirement using the load map views, meaning you can roughly decide for each of the requirements. I decide I'm going to do a September. I put priority that high. I feel this is the most important items for the September. And this requirement ought to be done in October. This epic should be done in October. And you can decide how many load map board for each month you want to see. So it gives you a high level of planning without caring for details of how the task should be created, how the testing should be conducted in detail. But roughly, you just want to have some of the requirements to be done for each month. What if you're ready to do the development? One way to do it is just drag and drop and assign a requirement into a development sprint, in this case, sprint 4. So as you notice, as you assign the requirement 13 into sprint 4, it gives you a number, dash number. This 5 represents, this is the 5th time you are committing a requirement for implementation purpose. Often, it should be the first time. When you're lucky, whenever you do implementation commitment, everything is done properly. When the team cannot do the work one time properly, sometimes you want to implement again. That will be second copy. Sometimes, obviously, you want to create the implementation commitment due to the fact the same requirement need to be implemented for the Windows versus for the mobile. It need to be implemented with a different at a different sprint or by a different team. As you commit the requirement implementation, DevSuite use a concept called implementation module. In this case, as you can see, if you want to implement a requirement 13, often it needs web user interface development. It might need Windows client if you're still supporting thick client Windows-based applications. In this case, we do not want to implement, this feature does not support mobile yet, but for server work, it requires some work. So you might click on the server, decide it's going to take about actually 2 days for somebody like Karen or Matt to implement. As you notice, as you do that, it roughly tells you if so, you are going to be starting this task, ending this task about 2 days of effort. So as you commit, it creates the task and the story into the development sprint 4. So now we're going to move on, since we don't have too much time to cover too much details. So we're going to skip creating requirement epic, creating a epic document, creating requirement spec in the requirement space, and move on, show you how do you manage development. So I think I'm going to log on or log in as a product owner. I'm going to create a sprint. So I am going to create, let's take a look of sprint 4. We know sprint 4 is a current sprint. This red color means these are the past sprint. It ought to be closed, but it's not closed. It's not good. So we display them in red colors. So the current sprint will be done this Friday. So tomorrow it will be done. As a product owner, I'm going to create a future sprint. So I'm creating a sprint below sprint 4. So I'm going to call it sprint 5. I'm going to copy some existing settings from my Spring 4. So Spring 4, I have two components, component A, component B. Those folders will be copied to Spring 5. And I'm going to copy the resource because I'm using the same Agile team to do the next sprint. So I create a sprint. The date is going to be 19. I think it's going to be more like maybe November 2012. It's going to be more like Monday, and the end date is going to be more like 2 weeks after next Monday. So it's going to be ending on the 11th of October. So once you do that, it creates a sprint based on your previous sprint with same subfolder of the Spring 4. Now it's time for you to populate the Spring 5. Instead of populate Spring 5, I'm going to just populate Spring 4 because Spring 4, I already have some contents. So we're going to turn on a detail frame, turn on the detail frame and show the requirement information. So as you can see, the Spring 5 is designed for you to further implement features that need to be done for this development space version 1. So these are the requirements. We're going to customize the requirement list, or we're going to just decide we're going to assign to Spring 4. In this case, we're going to show the task board of each team members. So as you can see, I look at Monica, or I look at Pamela. Pamela doesn't have much work yet. So we're going to drag this into Pamela's task board and directly assign to a state of in progress. We want to create multiple tasks. We say OK. And we're going to assign some more work to other programmers, other team members. So as a result, as you do that, each person start to have the number of tasks, start to have workload, because each task has time remaining. So now question is how, so after that, as a sprint planning meetings, one of the responsibility of the team is to make sure every single story committed are populated with the amount of work details and with task created and with time remaining properly estimated. So as you estimate all these time remaining properly, you will have the starting point of a sprint. If you look at the burn down, it should represent the burn down has a starting point reflecting the capacity of a team that they can finish the work. So after that, then each person will be driving and looking at their task. So if you click on the task, show the detailed properties, now you see each task has the description of the task, and if you look at the task, you will see the property description, as well you will see the time remaining and the time spent. In DevSuite, we feel it's important to encourage people to practice time spent, as well as properly estimate time remaining. So as you save the time spent and time remaining, one cool thing about this is now you can easily show the percentage finish of every single task. So now you can see this task is 27% down. This task is 0% down. And as a team member, you do daily stand-up meetings. You perform your work. You often look at the requirement. By looking at the requirement with one click, you see what needs to be done inside a Word document. And as you can see, it's all done via the web browsers. This is the IDEA server integrated with DevSuite, where all the documents are converted into a Flash or PDF-like like a file. You can view it easily. And often, as you work on the task 133, you realize you need to implement. This is the requirement. But how about testing standard? There are two ways. Often, you might see the requirement is fully documented. Therefore, your product owner working with your QA floaters or even the independent QA team to have defined the testing standard. In this case, there is a test case already defined for the programmer to look at. Oh, these are the testing procedures, and this is the expected results. So hopefully by looking at the requirement and looking at the testing, a task can be done, progressed, and with quality controlled. So imagine each of the team members look at their workload, properly estimate the time remaining, properly enter the time spent. You really get the result of, let's switch to the list view. You really get the result of the snapshot at any time, how the tasks are being finished towards the next status, as well towards one indicator of percentage finish. If you look at this task, there's a requirement you can look at. Once click, you can view the requirement. And certainly we hope the task owner will enter the time span, will enter the time remaining, and claim work is done. I'm going to send. This is work is done. Now I'm going to send over to the floaters. At time remaining is 0. I have spent 4 hours, estimated to be 4 hours. I have done 4 hours, and time remaining is 0. And I save it. It moves to the next state. As you move to the next state, now the testing needs to be performed. And in DevSuite, if you use the SpecDD module, one practice you can perform is you have a co-owner. You look at the testing standard. You assign the floaters. In this case, say Paul Wagner is a QA floaters. And in other words, the main task owner continues to be Pamela. But Paul actually is the owner of the QA testing subtask. So as the testing is performed to be successful, closed, QA passed, and as you commit this testing, then these tasks become properly closed with the quality controlled. Obviously, we have skipped a lot of details in terms of the daily, the 2 weeks, every day, each team member is driving the task and making the task go towards the time remaining 0, making all the tasks to become into the state of or finished. I say we have verified this task, and this task is done. So as you can see, you can configure the system so that you cannot commit a status change to be verified, closed, unless you have done a closed description. So in this case, there's a closed description. So we say this is properly done. So we commit this. So this task gets closed, and with the status change, if you force people to enter time spent and time remaining, it will pop up a message like this. It's all configurable. So as you do that, as you can see, this task now is closed in a state of closed state unless you want to reopen it. So the daily review meeting, the sprint review meeting is about, now let's look at all the tasks. By that time, you should expect everybody's work, if you look at open and closed, then everybody's task board, the task should be mainly in a state of QA verified. Or as you can see, you can also perform work by looking at the task board, moving the task to different state to perform the workflow operation as well. So as you look at the task and do the product demos, it's time to think about, now we're closing the current Sprint 4. It's time to think about Sprint 5. Obviously, one possibility is to just look at the requirement and product backlog, start to populate Sprint 5 as a product owner. And also, possibly, sometime you'll review all the tasks, and unfortunately, some of the tasks are not closed. So it is possible that you need to drag and drop some of the unfinished tasks into Sprint 5. Or you can run a visit and decide, I'm closing the Sprint 4, and for those unfinished tasks, I decide to move to next sprint, or decide to move to the next, move to the release backlog. So quickly, I want to summarize how you use DevSuite to run Agile process. You represent an Agile project with a space, a development space. You create sub-release or you create sprint folders, and you plan your sprint, let the team do the self-drivings, running their workload, and use the QA testing event to assure quality is performed. Finally, you close the sprint and you plan the next sprint. On and on. And finally, you run a few release sprints and close the space, finish the project. But how about let's think about from testing point of view. DevSuite gives you the ability of, for each requirement, you have a tab called a test, where you can create or select existing test cases or create new test cases to make sure the testing standard testing library is as complete as your team can do. As you can see, as your Agile team with the QA floater, with the joined QA members, working on the development sprint, they are actually not only creating the working software, but they are improving the understanding of the requirement, and often they'll be adding the test cases as well. In other words, as your sprint gets finished, you are actually developing a better testing standard as well. So now let's take a quick look of how DevTest can be used for you to perform testing without performing too many operations. Just give you an overview of how DevSuite is designed and what it can do. Once you go to DevSuite as a QA testing member or managers, you often see two views, the task views and the test case template views. So the test case template view lets you create testing standard. Often such test cases, if you look at all the test cases, often such test cases are actually created by your Agile team, especially with the contribution of the QA floaters. So once you standardize all these test case templates, DevTest lets you define the test case properties, lets you define the runtime variables. So as you perform testing for each of the test case template, it defines the functional testing procedures, the expected results. You might also decide, to test it. I need to test against different platforms, against game console, against different browsers. And you might make it all these variables to be all applicable or selected applicable. Therefore, for each test case, you have really quantified the behavior and the testing or the testing possibility that you need to perform test. Once you define such testing standard, testing quality becomes much more quantified, not only for the functional testing needs, but also the possible combination permutations of all these possible variations at the runtime to test your product. Once you're done with the testing library, often your Agile team are contributing to define such testing standards. Now you're ready to create a test release plan and then create multiple testing cycles. A testing cycle contains all these testing instances. They are often created based on the test case standard with the runtime variable permutations. It represents a specific test that you need to perform. As you perform testings, you might need to create multiple verification points. So one testing will not be successful unless all these verifications are successful. Otherwise, as you can see, some of the tests will become failed if any of the verification points get failed. And also, as you look at the testing, commit the testing to be failed, then if you make the change, commit the change, often it will triggers the creation of defect. So if you properly configure these testing configurations, then if you make one of the tests, I'm not sure if I configured the setting correct, then if you commit a testing notice, a new dialog window pops up because you are saying a test is failed. Therefore, you should create a defect or link an existing defect. So this is failed, my test. See the testing procedures as I commit. So now the defect as you can see, the defect will be committed, submitted to, say, a defect release backlog there. See, these are the bugs. So we say, fine, we're going to commit this defect found from regression testing by a testing cycle. So once we do that, we submit it. So a defect now gets submitted into a development space. If I move back to the development space, now you shall see a release backlog waiting for you to commit. Hopefully, let's commit to the next Spring 5. So if we look at the defect backlog details here, now you see all these release backlog. See this one contains a defect submitted. So as a result, you can look at all the backlog and the requirement to decide what will be the committed workload for my next Spring 5. So it's time for me to quickly summarize of what DevSuite can do. DevSuite provides you an integrated approach for you run Agile project or non-Agile project. In case you're running a project which is done the traditional way, waterfall, then often you divide the work into milestones and assign the requirements, commit them as stories, then you drive the task creations and to run the process. Everything in a way is consistent. No matter the project space is waterfall or Agile, the foundation is the same. As you develop the work, assure the quality. As you assure the quality by your team, you are helping to create a better testing case library. Such testing library serving the purpose of quantifying your quality of your product can be better used not only by your Agile team or by your development team doing the work development, assuring the quality, but also by you independent and coordinated regression testing team to run the test plan, to create a test cycle to assure the total product quality. Finally, I just want to quickly show you what planning can be used. planning really can be used to add on some much more cool dynamics into your development. First of all, if you look at the planning, you can see for Spring 4, now you have, let's look at Spring 3. Look at the Spring 3, this is your Gantt views. If you look at the workload view, now you can see for the Spring 4 how each of your team members perform their task. Agile does not require detailed planning, meaning you are not going to plan a start and end date for each of the team members. But each team members are encouraged to enter the time spent, time remaining. As they self-manage the process, driving themselves, they are going to be giving you a result. If you look at the task workload view, this is not the result of my planning. This is the result of a self-driving team. But it leaves a blueprint of showing you the roadmap once they took to finish the sprint work. Obviously, if you run a process which is a traditional process, like in this case, I'm looking at the content sharing manager, then indeed, you might as well decide to plan my start date and end date to do the planning, the resource planning, and the task planning as well. The portfolio view is designed for you to look at all the possible reports in a way of, as a high-level managers, looking at my project, not necessarily specific to a development space or a quality space or requirement space. I just want to look at the reports altogether. Obviously, you need to configure this report views. So now you start to see the overall health of your product and see, can you kind of look at the reports at a high level or diving to details to look at the reports in a detailed ways. In other words, as you run the dev track development, as you generate all these reports, it can be made available into by the PPM view as well. So with that much product demo, I'm going to conclude my webinars with one more slide giving you the summary of current slide. Giving you the summary, sorry for that, of what DevSuite is all about. As you can see, DevSuite is designed to be an enterprise LM solution. With the multi-site, we claim DevSuite can support unlimited scalabilities and requirement and quality integrated Agile platform, not only for your Agile management, but also for your traditional or hybrid Agile. Using Word to manage the requirement is cool. Once you play it, I think you're going to find it really makes the requirement management fun and easy. Quantified requirement is the key to drive the development testing with the Agile result as well as with the total traceability result. In DevSuite, or using the methodology of SpecDD, then a sprint not only delivers the improved working software, but really deliver the improved understanding and the requirement documentation as well. Finally, I want to emphasize DevSuite can be used not just for Agile process, Scrum, or SpecDD, but also for Waterfall, and obviously, it gives you the ability to customize the process by plugging in some Agile functions as well as simple planning, resource management, requirement management by yourself. So thank you. I hope we have a few minutes for questions.
Sure.
Renee, can you help?
Yes, why don't we take a couple minutes questions right now? One of the questions that have come up, well, first of all, I want to let everybody know that today's webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a link to all attendees. You'll get that link next week and that will give you a copy of the recording. But one of the questions that came in here, and it says, can you tie test cases to specific test cycles as well as specs and tasks?
Can you repeat the question?
Can you tie test cases to specific test cycles as well as specs and tasks?
Yes, you can. You can create using the test case, as you create a test cycle, you can actually say, you know what, I'm going to perform this test cycle with a scope of all the possible testing, but mainly it's going to be focused on all the work done in a sprint, all the story committed and finished in a sprint. As you can see, select one sprint. That means you're doing a test cycle testing, but specifically dedicated for a specific finished sprint. Obviously, you can select multiple sprints as well.
Okay. Here's another question. How do you prioritize your tasks?
Okay, yeah. Prioritize the task happens in multiple places. Obviously, one important place is the product backlog. So if you look at the task view here, really you have let me turn off the detail. Really for this project, you try to deliver the version 1. But it's not only about the finished work, but also the work that needs to be committed. Often it's in the release backlog. Obviously, the release backlog contains often, well, unfortunately, I do not have much content, so I'm going to use this backlog to explain to you the idea. So I want to show you the backlog this way. As you drag and drop, I change the priority of the backlog items. Obviously, for your requirement, you can use the roadmap or assign priority to prioritize the requirement as well. In SpecDD, we emphasize requirement should exist, but you can prioritize the requirement using the roadmap. So often, you see a rough roadmap already, and in this month, what are the most important items. Finally, even within a development sprint, say sprint 4, if you look at the board, you can really reprioritize the item by drag and drop. So you know, these are all work that need to be done, committed by Paul. But look, priority of this item is just happen to be higher. Obviously, it gives you another way, even go details. While everybody might be teasing you, why you want to do so much planning? But you might encourage your team members to decide, you know what, I am going to plan my work using the task board, but listed by planner start days. So in this case, I'm planning some work done Wednesday and some work done Tuesdays and some work done Fridays. So that's the way you prioritize and plan your workload.
Okay, and we're running out of time, but we have one last question, Kieran. How do you add contingency into your project planning and execution?
Okay. How do you add a contingency to your planning and executions?
Yes.
One possibility you want to do, this is less like an agile process, more like a traditional, we provide a few ways to do it. One is in the planning view as well as in the task view, you can actually define dependency and a milestone. And as you see, each of the sprint has a dedicated start date and end date. So anything go beyond the things, it will flag you. No, you have tasks that will not be finished on time. Obviously, those two tasks might be dependent, so therefore you add a dependency, as you can see. Now you define the dependency. And often you can also create items not only representing the workload of each team member, but you can create risk contract. So these are the items raising more flag because they are showing the health of your project plan, not only the planning purpose, as well as the executions. Finally, actually, it's the portfolio. In the portfolio, it gives you the highest level or very high level way of which project is making money, which project is being many delay for development sprint, too many tasks cannot be done, and the quality is not performed, or quality testing is performed by failure percentage rate is too high. This kind of monitoring and reporting using the PPM. So I think with this much, since we are running out of time, Renee, we're going to be ending this webinar. I just want to remind you guys all that we will be doing a monthly training on the SpecDD methodology, and sometime we'll be using DevSuite to show you how do you implement your development methodology. In this case, you can see a product can be used not only just for managing the tasks, the requirements, and managing the test case template, managing the test plan, the release test cycles, but really it can be fit into a more methodology. So you are practicing your development process in a more mature way. Hopefully, you guys, we will see you in the future SpecDD trainings and a future webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.